Welcome to the Midnight Gathering with Nancy Nightmare
and the Wizard.
Join us where the bizarre,
the mysterious, and the macabre meet.
And welcome to another episode, everybody.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for being here. And we're going to be discussing why, one of the reasons, I distrust children.
Well, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Today, we're going to be discussing The Omen from 1976, the film that made an entire generation side-eye children.
That's right. Forget ghosts, vampires, or slashers. This movie proves that the scariest horror villain is just a 5-year-old.
Isn't that the way? Between evil nannies, priests, and freak accidents, The Omen keeps you guessing and reminds you why kids are not to be trusted. Now, I don't think all children are not to be trusted.
Really?
Well, they're not all the Antichrist, are they? I'm not a parent, so maybe they are.
Well, since we don't know who it is, we're going to have to
just be suspicious of all of them.
Yeah, be suspicious of all of them.
I didn't trust other kids when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, everybody's very unpredictable, so.
Yeah, I mean, they act like drunk little adults, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those little grabby, sticky hands.
No, for sure.
Yeah, kids are all right.
Yeah. Well, this one is unique, right? Because he wasn't this person's child.
Well, that's right. And we can get into the plot summary. Spoilers ahead for this 1976 film. But this, to me, is a great parable, a great story of why you really shouldn't lie to your wife.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because, again, I always talk about bad decisions making great horror films. If he hadn't made a bad decision, we wouldn't have a film.
Yeah, for sure.
Or some poor other schmuck would have had this kid.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we watch Robert Thorne's progression throughout the film from very confident, self-assured to progressively second-guessing himself, second-guessing the child, and then ultimately crumbling.
Right, and I just want to point out that Robert Thorne is played by Gregory Peck, which to me, there's a lot of things about this film that set it apart, and one of those things is the quality of acting, the quality of production, the soundtrack. Obviously, there was money put into this film.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it kind of has that Exorcist feeling for me of being just a good film. It's not a good horror film. It's just a good film.
Mm-hmm. I would say that The Exorcist as well as The Omen are neck and neck for first place for me.
Wow. That's a bold statement because you weren't really a fan of The Omen the first time you watched it.
Yeah, I have to admit, for some reason, maybe I was watching a lot of 80s horror, which is a different vibe. You know, a lot of slasher movies, so it moves very quickly. There's not much plot line. And then all of a sudden, it was like we've got the stories, character development, and the pacing of it I wasn't used to immediately. So that's why at first I was uncertain.
Understandable. I feel like they do a good job of using camera motion to keep you moving along with the story, even though it is a slower story that unfolds in its own time. Mm-hmm. They also throw in a really good kill every once in a while.
Oh, yeah.
Where you're like, oh my God, did that just happen?
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 of them that I'm thinking of right now in particular that are just like kind of horrifying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But you know what? Not much blood.
Some blood, but you're right, not much blood.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not like a gore fest.
No, it's not a slasher for sure.
Yeah, and it's not something like, you know, the Reanimator or the Beyond, where you have a lot of crazy special effects. This is more story development, the use of music to create suspense.
Right.
And, you know, if you're religious, right, the idea that the boogeyman is just a 5-year-old child.
He's so cute, too.
Right.
They always pick the cutest kids for these movies. I love it.
Yeah, and if you see a Rottweiler somewhere, be careful.
Oh, that dog was the star of the movie. You're so freaking cute. When they first show him on the screen, he's like he's just the cutest dog.
Yep.
So what he deserved an Academy Award, really.
Oh yeah, for Hound of Hell
in a horror movie. If you haven't seen the film, why don't we do a little plot summary and we'll just get everybody acquainted on the or if you hadn't seen it in a while, like we hadn't.
Yeah. So Robert Thorne, who's played by Gregory Peck, is an American diplomat, secretly adopts the baby after his own child dies at birth. No big deal, right? Wrong.
Yeah, I mean, secret. It's a big secret to keep. The kid, Damien, grows up kind of weird. That's an understatement. Animals hate him. His nanny offs herself at his birthday party. And the new nanny is giving massive cult vibes.
A priest warns Robert that Damien is the Antichrist, because of course he is. But before we give all the details, bam, Final Destination style impalement.
A photographer and Robert start connecting the dots, leading to one of the most dramatic decapitations in horror history.
Oh, for sure. By the time Robert realizes Damien's Satan's spawn, it's too late. Attempts at an exorcism failed. Attempts at murder also failed. Damien wins, the end.
I have to say that decapitation is my favorite part of the movie for sure.
Yeah, definitely the most shocking, I would say.
Yeah, it was my favorite part of the movie. And the way that the head tumbles off and it looks so real.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And what's scarier than a big pane of glass?
Mm-hmm.
It's just set up. Every time you see something like that, you're like, oh, okay, that could just slice me in half.
Yeah. Yeah. And Keith Jennings, who's played by David Warner, who first starts to notice weird findings in his images that he had taken throughout the day, where he saw the kind of like a javelin through the priest. He also was seeing his own death as well.
Right. So the photographer was seeing foreshadowing of all these events in the pictures he was taking. Mm-hmm. And the reason he got so heavily involved is because he saw the foreshadowing of his own death in one of the photos.
Right.
So, it wasn't altruism that led him to try to help in this situation. It was self-preservation, which is the strongest motivator we have as human beings, I think.
Oh, yeah. Survive, baby. That's the name of the game.
Look at you adding babies to your sentence like I do. Mm-hmm. Spend too much time together,
too
baby.
Too many podcasts, baby.
I like it.
So why don't you let us know why Damien is the worst child ever?
Oh, and I wrote worst child ever, but is he? Let's hope he's the worst child ever. Let's hope there's not one worse than him. Okay, so his nanny offs herself, throwing herself off a roof at his birthday party. That is not normal.
Animals freak out around him. Even the monkeys at the zoo want him gone.
Yeah, those monkeys did not like him. He knocks his mom off of a balcony. This is why you don't get around high places with kids, especially staircases.
His real mom is a jackal. Imagining opening a grave and finding out your kid's mother was a beast. That's worse than bad in-laws, for sure.
Yeah. When they open that tomb and see that the mother was a creature, that's one of the creepiest parts of the film.
Brother, your mother's a jackal, and she's in heat.
Channeling They Live. I like it. And finally, why he's the worst child ever. He looks smug at his parents' funeral. If you ever see a small child smirking at a funeral, just assume that they're full of Satan.
Yeah. Apparently, Richard Donner was saying that he was quite a sweet child, and it took work to get him worked up because he has very magnetic eyes. Yeah. So he would like grab him and like pinch him.
Oh, gee, why do Hollywood children end up with problems later in life? You imagine?
Especially that scene where he throws a tantrum as they near the church.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm watching the abuse of this little guy.
Yeah.
I guess I don't hate children. I'm just kind of wary of them.
Well, if you notice, I think that's the only moment in the film where he
emotes,
loses it.
Yeah, he's pretty silent the rest of the film.
Yeah, he's quiet. Never got sick.
He's a good kid.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe the Satan in children, maybe that's the solution, actually. If you just keep him out of the church and stay away from high places. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it.
Yeah. I will say that the only things that are potentially bad with the film, and that's only if you're a hardcore nerd, for instance, the poem that the priest says is not in the book of Revelations. It's not true.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that it's not true. They do a spin on the Trinity. So, which is like God,
Father,
Jesus,
Son, and Holy Spirit.
So I guess it's like Satan, Antichrist, and I don't know, Lucifer maybe. So because Damien is the Antichrist, he's not Satan himself.
Right. I don't remember how that's supposed to work in Christianity. So Antichrist brings on the apocalypse, I believe, but he's not necessarily Satan.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. And wow, what great luck that he's in a political family.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was very clever of them to write that's that was the way he comes to power and destroys the world.
Right. Yeah.
Not a musician.
Not a musician. Nope, we're not doing any harm.
Not an athlete.
Not an athlete, no.
No.
Athletes, if they do cause harm, it tends to be within a small circle usually.
Right. You gotta if you want to make a big impact, you gotta run for office.
Yeah, that sure is true. If you really want to mess with the world, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So let's talk about whether it was a cursed production, bad luck, or just savvy marketing.
Probably savvy marketing.
Yeah. Lightning strikes twice. A plane carrying the screenwriter was struck by lightning. Then a flight Gregory Peck was supposed to be on was also struck by lightning. Supposed to.
And they say lightning never strikes twice. I don't know if that's actually a saying. I'm just being ominous. The baboon scene was real terror. The actress playing Catherine was not acting. The baboons were really that aggressive.
Decapitation déjà vu. The film's special effects artist later survived a real-life car crash where a companion was decapitated, eerily similar to the scene he actually designed.
Very eerie, but also, like, decapitations would all be similar because they all have the same premise of head removal. Mm-hmm. So would there ever be a dissimilar decapitation?
That's a good question.
Right? Like, one decapitation is very similar to the other.
Right.
No matter the circumstances. Now, if it had been a pane of glass that did it, then that would have been some very eerie stuff.
Yeah.
Trainer killed by lions. A zookeeper involved in the film was mauled to death the day after they filmed at a safari park.
Not the actual park or that park specifically?
That it doesn't, I don't remember. I just saw that a zookeeper involved with the film was mauled to death the day after they filmed at a safari park.
Gotcha.
So the zookeeper was killed. I don't know about the location.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering if like the marketing team were like, hey, just say that like a zookeeper in Australia happened to get killed the day after.
Right.
While, after the filming or whatever, just to drum up publicity.
Our fact-checking team, they're often just kind of like out of it and drinking a lot of Diet Pepsi and not sleeping.
Yeah.
So some of this may or may not be accurate from time to time.
Yeah, I feel it's like a game of telephone, like back in the day, where somebody tells a story, like tells somebody something, and before you know it, it's like the story gets wild, like out of control with, the death and how it actually happened.
Yeah, that's kind of how my fact checking is. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I heard this story, I read it somewhere, I think it's true.
Yeah. Now this film too also has some iconic moments. For instance, the birthday party. It's all for you, Damien, and then snap.
That was a great scene, and she looked so gleeful as she did it. The actress did a phenomenal
when the dog
job.
told her to do it.
He's so cute.
He came out of the bushes.
What a good boy.
And he was like, do it. Do it now.
I want a Rottweiler now.
We need to bring Miss Baylock.
Miss Baylock was scary. The priest's death. If you're going to warn someone about the Antichrist, maybe you shouldn't stand near a church with a conveniently placed lightning rod.
Yeah, and wait an hour for it to come down.
Oh my God, that was the funniest scene. It reminded me of, if you've ever seen Austin Powers, where he's like, no! And there's a car driving towards him and it's really slow. That's kind of what it was like. He had a lot of time to get out of the way of that lightning rod, and he did not.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like the lightning strikes, hits the pole comes flying down. We got a shot of the priest yelling, no. Shot of the pole still coming down. Shot of the priest, no. Then again, the pole. I don't know how long this happened, but I swear it was like you could have moved several feet, maybe like gone a drink of water somewhere.
He could have just dove
right.
towards the building because then the trajectory would have been off.
Yeah, yeah.
But very poor survival instincts.
Yeah, for sure.
But that priest was sick, apparently.
He was.
Yeah.
That's right. He had
cancer, I believe.
Yes.
They found out later in his obituary. So
Right.
maybe he just knew it was his time.
Yeah.
And that was just God's will.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is that after the nanny moment, we cut to a scene where Robert Thorne is heading to the office where he's confronted by reporters regarding the incident. He goes upstairs, and then that's when the priest shows up. And the priest, wants to tell Robert, like, I don't know why he doesn't just is straightforward and says, hey, listen, your child is the Antichrist. It's all this like ambiguous, like mumbo jumbo.
That's a really good point. If he had just been matter of fact and said, I know that you adopted this child and didn't tell your wife. This is what happened. Your child is the Antichrist. I'm sure you've seen the signs. This is what you need to do to remedy the situation.
Right. But instead, he says, you need to give your life over to Christ, eat his flesh, and drink his blood. Those were his words.
Not a good salesperson.
Right? I mean, I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. So my child's the Antichrist, and now you want me to, become a vampire?
Yeah, the whole eating of the body of Christ and stuff is never a good sales pitch, in my opinion.
Right.
Like, that's gross. Can we call this something else?
And they specifically used that language in the film because then he repeats it again.
Yeah,
you know?
He was
and
pretty adamant
he's
about
like,
it.
no, like, seriously, dude, like, the fate of humanity rests on you and you only. And in order for you to save everybody on this planet, you have to eat Jesus' flesh and drink his blood.
Yeah. You don't sound crazy at all.
Nope. Everything's good on this side of the room.
And then he calls security, obviously, because this person seems completely insane.
Well, yeah, dude, if somebody like storms into my office and tells me like, hey, your child is the Antichrist, it's going to destroy the planet, so you got to go eat some flesh and drink some blood. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah. Even if he is a priest, I think I would call security too.
Yeah.
Again, just the bad decisions make great horror movies.
Oh, yeah.
If the priest had been a better communicator, if Gregory Peck's character hadn't lied to his wife and taken a random baby at the hospital, none of this could have happened.
I also want to point out who was a no-show during the filming. I don't know if it was due to budget constraints or maybe timetable, and this person was busy doing another film, but God never makes an appearance in this film.
Often busy.
I think he was working with George Burns.
That's right. He was probably in that film at this time. Yeah, you keep thinking that he's going to show up and help these poor people out in all these situations.
Yeah.
And his fees must be incredibly high because you never see him.
Right. Yeah. So what's interesting about, and I don't think this was ultimately the moral of the story, right? But I feel like the moral of the story is like, it's up to you, meaning whoever is the person who's being attacked by Satan, it's up to you because you can't really count on anybody. Like, it's like, yeah, go take communion, but it's all on you.
You're on your own, baby.
You got to go take the child. You got to go bring him to the church. You got to put him up on the altar. Then you got to drive 6 stakes through this child's body in the form of a cross. I mean, if that doesn't sound brutal, I don't know what does.
Yeah, you'd think the omnipotent being who you serve could come down and just put a stop to all this.
Right.
Hey, some backup, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought the whole thing was just very interesting.
That is very interesting and something that really hadn't occurred to me in this movie. All these nice people wanted was to raise a child.
Yeah.
And their own child was killed by this cult. Mm-hmm. They killed their own child.
Right.
Replaced it with this Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody stopped it. The good did not triumph over evil.
Well, it's interesting. Upon rewatching the film, I noticed in the opening scene where Gregory Peck is standing with the priest and the nun, and they're looking at the baby through the window. If you look at the reflection in the mirror of the priest, he almost looks like a goblin.
Oh, here it comes.
It's wild. Like, I was like, wait a minute. Like, his ears look pointy, his nose looks pointy in the reflection, but when you look at him, he looks like himself, of course.
Interesting observation.
Yeah.
Wizard special observation. Mm-hmm. I didn't notice that.
Why the Omen still holds up. It's a psychological horror at its best. No jump scares, just creeping dread.
Creeping Dread is also going to be the name of my death metal band.
Yes.
Just so you know. The deaths are brutal and unexpected. The Final Destination franchise owes this movie a thank you card.
Mm-hmm. Jerry Goldsmith, Oscar-winning score. That chilling Ave Satani chant still hits, for sure.
I definitely sang that for a while after we watched this. And to your credit, you didn't tell me to shut up, so thank you for that.
All right. Yeah. And you were saying that the music reminds you of
Ghost. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ghost drew. I mean,
did they use it? I feel like they used it in the intro of one of their shows when we went to see them.
Oh, I don't know about that, but very similar, but you know, it also, this pulls from a lot of traditional music. So it's just a kind of bastardization of traditional church music with some really dissonant harmonies. And what I mean by that is like two notes sang together that kind of rub. So when you listen to it, you hear that something is uncomfortable, but if you're not really a musician or aware of that, you might not know why it feels so uncomfortable.
Right.
And that was just such a great arrangement choice by Jerry Goldsmith or whoever his arranger was.
Yeah. A lot of films counted on strong music for its horror. One that immediately comes to mind is Argento's Suspiria.
Oh,
like
boy.
Goblin soundtrack.
Yeah, Goblin's hard to listen to, but it creates a lot of tension. It's so appropriate for that film.
The soundtrack from The Exorcist as well is quite memorable.
Right.
Halloween.
Of course.
No. 70s, baby.
And it still holds up because it taps into primal fears, as all great horror movies do. What's scarier than discovering your child might literally be the devil or the Antichrist?
The Omen isn't just a horror classic. It's a parenting horror story.
That's right. If your child refuses to go to church, which I did, makes dogs act weird, I was terrified of dogs, and people keep dying around them, maybe don't just brush that off.
And remember, always check the hospital records before leaving the hospital.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, you may want to take a look at the baby, too.
Make sure that's your kid. Now, if it is your kid and you still think it might be possessed, just leave it at the hospital.
Yeah. Well, here's another thing that is a sticking point with the film. So the way that Gregory Peck discovers that Damien is the Antichrist is because he's told that he's got a birthmark. And he's like, well, I've never seen a birthmark. I know his body like inside and out. He's like, no, it's like under his hair. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like when he was an infant, wouldn't he have seen the three little dots on his head?
Right. He said, no, it has to be somewhere. So Gregory Peck's character goes and checks Damien while Damien's asleep. Right. And he's ruffling through his hair pretty aggressively. And Damien doesn't wake up.
Right.
You would think that would wake the kid up.
And he's like stunned that he's seeing it for the first time.
Right. Wasn't your baby bald when you brought him home, basically? So you didn't see this weird 666 on his head? Not very observant.
No.
Another bad decision that leads to great horror.
Yep.
Yeah. So definitely recommend watching this classic. Yep. And sometimes when people recommend classic films, they tend to be a little boring sometimes. And this one is a slow pace, but I would not call this film boring.
No. And the dialogue is great. The character development is great. The cinematography is beautiful. We get these long, sweeping shots of rooms, so you can feel like the vibe that you're there, and you can feel the isolation, you can feel the anxiety, the fears.
Yeah. So if you think your child might be the Antichrist, make sure you check under their hair. Don't do so aggressively, though, because chances are your child's not the Antichrist.
Right, because you probably would have seen it from birth.
Right. Yeah, and if you're pretty sure it's your kid, then if it is the Antichrist, that's your fault.
No. But, okay, so I said things that were wrong. Things that I think worked really well, I would say, in addition to great acting. I like the story overall. I thought it was very clever that they decided that this person is going to have their child swapped out at the hospital, given a new baby. This baby is the Antichrist. All of a sudden, dad gets a promotion. They're off to London.
Yeah, we also didn't mention that, and I'm sure if you've seen this, you remember this, but at the end, the president of the United States adopts Damien. That was a big win for Damien at the end, you know.
Is he the president of the United States?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. That was his friend, remember?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
So upgrade. He got rid of the parents that were just ambassadors.
Yeah.
And now he's with the president.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
On to Omen 2 is what I say.
Yeah. And apparently it's got a lot of really great reviews. Omen 2, the sequel.
I think we've seen it. I know that, we have the Blu-ray collection of this. Sometimes when we watch so many horror movies, it's hard to keep track of what you've seen, which is why, honestly, this podcast is so much fun to make.
Yeah.
Because it forces us to really pay attention to detail. We have documentation that we've seen the film and we know what goes on in it.
Yeah.
And now you do too.
Yeah.
So if you've seen the film and you haven't seen it in a while, you can watch our little recap, and now we're all on the same page, and we can go on to Omen 2 if we want to.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would recommend this as a starter horror film for people who are just trying to get their feet wet.
I don't know if you realize how afraid of horror people are. I have a dear friend who we're very close friends. She won't even watch our podcast because she's so afraid of horror movies. Mm-hmm. And I mean, isn't that funny that we're friends? But she's a wonderful human being, and she just cannot tolerate anything scary. So I think that even like the last Harry Potter movie was scary for her. And with these decapitations,
well, there's only one.
You have the decapitation, the impalement.
I think just
nanny.
for like the shock factor.
I don't think she'd recover. She's a genuinely nice person. No. She would have nightmares.
Yeah, like I would say that this would be like maybe one of the entryways into it, because there is the suspense and mystery factor in the film. You know, it's not very bloody, which gets a lot of people in gore. Sometimes like it's hard to watch.
But I wonder if you're very religious, if this would be a really scary film.
Probably. I
think so. It's hard. Again, it's hard for us to know because we've seen so many horror movies and we've worked through all that stuff in ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I remember there was a time where this probably would have really scared me.
Right. I definitely think that this film would be like one of the first like Gothic films, you know, because it borrowed a lot from like Hammer movies. It has that very like 70s like British vibe to it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's one of the first Gothic films. Do you mean of the 70s or?
Yeah, I would say like 1970s because it's got that mystery. It's not, you know, it's not like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre where it's like straight up violence. It's not like The House on the Left that's also like extremely violent. It's not a slasher like Halloween. And it's not as over the top scary like The Exorcist, where, you know, Reagan transforms and she's, you know, covered in mucus and she's vomiting, and you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Yeah.
It has like a lot of like vibe, and it's unsettling and creepy in its own unique way, which I feel like is more about just being dark without the over the top gruesomeness.
Interesting. Yeah, there are some gruesome moments. Oh, we forgot the mother's death too. That is a good one actually, and I completely forgot about it. That shocking moment at the hospital where she goes out the window, and then there's that shot of her. She fell through the roof of the ambulance. It's just, not. That was the nanny who did that. Creepy nanny did that.
No, I would say that would be kill number 2. That. You know, number 1 is the decapitation. Number 2
as far as how good they are.
Yeah, in terms of ranking.
Ooh, that's a tough one because the impalement was really good too.
Yeah. Well,
I would say first nanny death is probably at the bottom of the list.
But
even that was shocking.
Oh yeah, like the skewer to the face.
Well, the nanny death where she jumped off and, you know.
I thought you were talking about Mrs. Baylock at the end.
Now that we're really reflecting on it, there are a lot of great deaths in this movie. Mm-hmm. And everyone is so shocking that you almost... Oh, and the graveyard scene with the dogs attacking them. Now, they didn't die during that, but you kept thinking they were going to.
Yeah. And that, would you say, has a very, like, Gothic feel, like, when they were walking through the graveyard?
Yeah, I see what you're saying about it being Gothic. Yeah. It's not a word I would use to describe it, because I usually think of Gothic as being stuff that's more romantic. But there are moments of this. To me, this is pure satanic horror, which doesn't necessarily always have to be gory.
Yeah.
But you could describe it that way. I understand what you're saying, especially that scene.
Yeah.
With the hounds of hell, who are very cute. Mm-hmm. So, highly recommend this film. I mean, we tend to only want to watch films that we like. Mm-hmm. So, you know, sometimes we'll watch newer films and they may be a disappointment. But these older films, you kind of know you're going to get something good.
Yeah, especially the 1970s. There's so many great movies that came out that basically laid the groundwork for the Satanic Panic 80s, which I feel is like the Exorcist, the Omen, and then in 1968 with Rosemary's Baby, which was like the first that kicked things off.
Isn't it funny that there was Satanic Panic in the 80s and there's also so many great horror films in the 80s? Mm-hmm. I feel like oppressive governments or like a more conservative overall vibe in the country is a great time for horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I feel like it's going to be interesting to see if we have like a horror resurgence coming.
Yeah. I'd like to see like really good stories. Like, I mean, obviously Nosferatu is a remake, but I'd be curious to see what like stuff moving forward is like. Like, I mean, The Witch was great, and that's a unique story. That's a wonderful horror movie.
Overall in film in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're lacking a lot of original stories. I mean, Nosferatu was great, but did I really need another Nosferatu?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad it exists and I enjoyed it, but I don't probably need another one after this.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things we can do that are original.
Right. Yeah, because The Exorcist was, I mean, obviously based on an original story. The Omen was also an original story. So,
right.
You know.
Yeah, and that's hopefully where we're going to be going in the future. I mean, we just saw Wolfman. That's a remake, basically a reimagining.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we've got The Monkey coming out soon, and that's a telling of a book or a short story.
Yep.
So when you think about it, there's a lot of that in every genre. But
yeah.
I'm going to watch all of them.
Yeah.
I like it, but I'd like to see some original stuff too. So we'll see what comes out in the next, few years.
For sure.
All right. Well, that's all we've got today. And we hope you'll meet us again at the Midnight Gathering. Until next time, stay spooky.